Hey everybody, it's Mr. Anderson, and here we are doing a troubleshooting video for the argument prompt on the AP essay. Now, if you are finding yourself getting 7s, 8s, and 9s on these essays, you probably don't need to watch this video. This video is intended for two kinds of people. One, if you do not feel confident in the argument essay. Or two, if you know that you're the kind of test taker where if you get thrown a curveball and something frazzles you that you can freeze. Or you're afraid that you're going to spend so much time thinking about what to write that you maybe don't get enough time to write a sufficiently long essay. So this is kind of like a break glass in case of emergency setup here. And so I'm going to give you some tips, and these tips are really just for writing a timed essay. Just to make that clear, this is not generally how you should write an argument essay if you're given lots of time at home, but again, sort of an emergency strategy. Okay, so here I have the argument prompt from the 2015 AP Lang exam. I'm going to blow it up a little bit bigger here so you can see what it's actually saying, and I think you'll see immediately that this is different than for some of the argument ones we've seen. So I'm going to read this out loud. It says, an anthropologist studying first-year students at a university in the United States writes that friendly phrases like, how are you, nice to meet you, and let's get in touch communicate politeness rather than literal intent. What, if anything, is the value or function of such polite speech? Now let me stop there for a second. One thing to remember on the argument essay is that they will almost always ask you the question twice. So if you didn't quite understand what it was saying by what, if anything, is the value or function of such polite speech, you can keep reading and they'll almost always ask you the question a second time. In a well-written essay, develop your position on the value or function of polite speech in a culture or community with which you are familiar, and then use appropriate evidence from your reading experience, observations, etc., etc. Now, if you are the kind of person who tends to overthink things on a timed exam, this can be hugely problematic. First of all, they're asking you a question about yourself, your own culture or community. We're not used to writing about ourselves. They're also not necessarily asking you about whether or not polite speech is good or bad. They say the value or function of polite speech. So are you supposed to write about what polite speech is for? Are you supposed to write about whether or not polite speech is good? Are you supposed to write about polite speech generally or just in your community? So you can see all the ways that something like this might make you freeze if you were trying to write an essay under stressful conditions. So here's what I want to do if you find yourself being in that position. It's a three-step process. 1, you're going to simplify and pick a side. 2, you're going to give 2 supports and a rebuttal. And finally, you're going to remember to use the prompt as an anchor. So we're going to go through those 3 steps right now. Simplify and pick a side. What you need to do is just forget about all the different ways you can answer this question and zero in on one thing that you can answer. In this case, what is the value of polite speech? That means, is polite speech good or bad? I realize that the issue is more complicated than that, but for the test, we are going to what? Simplify and pick a side. So, if you were asking whether or not polite speech is good, there are 2 ways you can answer that question. You could say, it is certainly true that polite speech is vital, or you could say, the claim that polite speech is vital is misinformed. And you need to choose one of those 2 sides. Now, what I'm going to say for the purpose of this video is we're going to choose this first one. It is true that polite speech is vital. However, I want you to remember that regardless of what you are going to answer when you're saying your point of view, I want you to write down both sides of the issue. I'm going to say that again. I want you to write down on your page both the side that you're taking and the side that you're against. And you're going to need this again later on. Okay, so at that point, you've simplified and you've taken a stand. At that point, I want you to actually start writing. I want you to write your first paragraph. Even if you haven't figured out what your supports are going to be, I want you to begin by maybe telling an anecdote, maybe summarizing the issue in the prompt, but end by stating again the side that you're taking. In this case, it's certainly true that polite speech is vital. So now you've got, believe it or not, your first paragraph, and that gets a lot of the stress out of the way. Remember, you don't have to know everything you're going to write before you start writing. So now you've got your first paragraph and you've said what you're going to be arguing. Now you need our second step, which is 2 supports and a rebuttal. So now you need to think of reasons you're going to say that polite speech, phrases like how are you, what's up, how was your day, why are those things important? And as you sit there and you rack your brain, I was talking with someone the other day who said, I'm not sure where I'm supposed to get this knowledge from. What if I don't have any background knowledge? Well, one thing you can always do is consider the counterfactual, which is even if you can't think of anything to support your side of the argument, you can always think of what it would be like if the thing you are talking about didn't exist. In this case, what would society look like if polite speech didn't exist, if people didn't bother to say those little phrases that make us signal that we're trying to be polite? Well, to me that would sound a lot like the internet. So you have right there your first paragraph. You're going to write about the internet and how we don't want that in our society. So now you know your first paragraph. Now your second paragraph, you need another support. And you're racking your brain, you can't think of anything except maybe your personal experience. So if you boil it down to having nothing but personal experience with which to support your points, I want to give you another tip, which is that I stories, you can change them to we or the average person, and it instantly makes it sound more academic. So let's say you can't think of any great academic examples of why we should have polite speech, but you know that there was this one time where you went into a situation and were meeting people for the first time and you used polite talk and little, filler speak in order to make things go more smoothly, what we would call small talk. So we'll make our second paragraph about small talk. Our third paragraph, we remember that we want to do two supports and a rebuttal. So what's a rebuttal? A rebuttal is the other side that you are not taking, and that's why it's so important that you wrote down both sides of the argument when you first started to plan this. And so we're taking this side, but you already wrote down the claim that polite speech is vital is misinformed. So now you're going to argue against that side. And you have to think of some reasons why this side is wrong. So you would begin your rebuttal paragraph by saying, some people may think that the claim that polite speech is vital is misinformed. Now, why might they think that? They may think that polite speech is a way for you to manipulate people, that it's dishonest. So what would you say to somebody who believes those things? That's your third paragraph. So now you have your two supports and a rebuttal. And you've already written your intro paragraph. Now, the third part, and this is really where it ties all together, is this idea of using the prompt as an anchor. And what I mean by that is very simple. You want to make sure as you are reading the prompt that you are picking out certain words and phrases that you can refer back to. So this prompt is unusual in that they don't give you a person who said the quote, they just refer to an anthropologist. But of course, you could talk about that anthropologist in your response, and it would make you seem very engaged with the prompt. What are some other words we could have used? How about this? Communicate politeness versus literal intent. We could have also talked about the value of polite speech. So we're going to use those same words and phrases when we write our actual essay as a way of signaling that we're engaged with the prompt. So for example, if you're writing about the internet and how we don't want society to be like that, you might say something like, if you have ever gone to an internet message board or YouTube comments, you can see what people are like when they don't have polite speech to mediate what they say. What would society be like if everybody just used their literal intent? And you could put that in quotes. If everyone was just speaking their literal intent in face-to-face society, people probably wouldn't get along well at all and would end up fighting in the streets. So, once again, our three steps here for the argument essay are 1, simplify and pick a side. Don't worry about whether or not the prompt is complex. This is a timed essay. You probably have 35 minutes to write it. Pick a side. But when you pick a side, make sure you write down the other side. 2 supports and a rebuttal. And remember, if you can't think of something to support your argument, you can always consider the counterfactual. And if you can only think of personal stories, you can always change the I to a we or to the average person. The bell's ringing and I'm almost done too. Finally, you want to remember to use the prompt as an anchor. And that's when you go back to the original prompt, use certain words or phrases from the prompt, and make sure you include those in your response. So this is not a guaranteed 9 on the AP exam, but this is a guaranteed way to write a competent essay. And if you feel like you're the kind of person who can't always do that or is under a lot of pressure when you write, try using this method. I'm going to post in the comment section below a link to an essay that I wrote for this prompt based on this tactic here. Thanks a lot. Hope it was helpful.